Thank you everybody for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. As Caitlin mentioned, I will be discussing the clinical trial diversity bills in Congress. Go to the next slide. So on the agenda today, we'll be discussing the Diversifying Investigations via Equitable Research Studies for Everyone, known as the Diverse Trials Act, the Diversity and Equitable Participation in Clinical Trials, known as the DEPICT Act, the Health Equity and Accountability Act of 2022, and we'll end with a comparison of the three bills. Next slide. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna hop into the Diverse Trials Act. That was introduced on August 10th, 2021 in the Senate by Senator Robert Menendez, and on August 13th, 2021 in the House by Representative Raul Ruiz. And the purpose of this bill is to increase clinical trial diversity and improve data collection for COVID-19 and other public health emergencies as it relates to social determinants of health. So in this bill, the HHS Secretary is to issue guidance on how to conduct decentralized clinical trials. They're also to create international harmonization on the regulations of DCTs and the use of digital health technologies or remote assessment options. Drug or device manufacturers are required to provide free provisions of digital health technologies to their clinical trial participants. A laboratory report is required, and that report is to include 1, how to improve current COVID-19 data collection activities, and 2, how to advance policies to address social determinants of health and collection of race and ethnicity in clinical trials. Remuneration can be offered to promote participation in the approved clinical trials, so long as it is registered and facilitates equitable inclusion of participants. And the Secretary will engage to design a national interoperable platform, and that interoperable platform will be used to improve access to health data and other relevant data needs during public health emergencies, such like COVID-19. Next slide. All right, the second bill we're going to take a look at is the DEPICT Act, which was introduced on February 3rd, 2022 in the House by Representative Anna Eshoo. And the purpose of this bill is to direct the Commissioner of the FDA to amend regulations to increase clinical trial diversity. So it discusses investigational use of drugs, and sponsors are required to include in their trials applications regarding demographic subgroup disease and or condition prevalence. For devices, similar, they're required to include in their clinical trial application demographic subgroups expected to use their device. There is an annual report that is required that justifies why enrollment targets weren't met. The application submitted should include enrollment targets, rationale for those enrollment targets, as well as a diversity action plan. Safety and effectiveness data for the drug is required for subgroups if the clinical trial did not meet enrollment targets. An additional report is needed that is discussing the progress on increasing diversity in clinical trial and study enrollment, and that report must be submitted annually. Lastly, the Secretary of HHS is to award grants and enter into cooperative agreements with qualified entities to increase participation in clinical trials and or research. Next slide. Thank you. The third bill we'll be taking a look at is the Health Equity and Accountability Act of 2022. This was recently introduced on April 26, 2022 in the House by Representative Robin Kelly. The purpose of this act is to improve health for minority individuals and for other purposes. So racial and ethnic disparity in safety or effectiveness of a drug or product is to be investigated for pre-approval studies. For post-market studies, the Secretary may require investigation if there is evidence of racial or ethnic disparity in the safety or effectiveness of a drug or product. The Director of NIH should also work with the Director of the National Institute of Minority Health to improve the number of minority participants as study subjects in kidney disease clinical trials. So that is specifically for kidney disease clinical trials only. The FDA Commissioner shall aggregate information and accumulate the experiences of sponsors who develop and execute clinical trial diversity plans during drug development, and they'll use that information to determine what worked and what didn't work to enhance clinical trial diversity. Included in this bill as well is the Diverse Trials Act, which I recently covered. And some of you may have heard of the Clinical Trial Diversity Act, which was never introduced. However, it was subsumed into the Health Equity and Accountability Act. And the purpose of that bill is to direct the Secretary of HHS to take steps to increase clinical trial diversity. Next slide. So there are similarities and differences between the three bills. As you can see, each bill discusses utilizing decentralized clinical trials. It talks about the secretary awarding grants and/or entering cooperative agreements, reporting and planning on the collection of race and ethnicity, and engaging with external entities to increase diverse participation in clinical trials. The Diverse Trials Act and Health Equity Act both discuss creating international harmonization and remuneration, so providing participants funding during clinical trials. And the DEPICT Act and Health Equity Act both require the sponsor to submit an annual report discussing enrollment targets. As of now, the Diverse Trials Act has 1 House co-sponsor and 5 Senate co-sponsors. The DEPICT Act has 10 co-sponsors, 1 Republican, 9 Democrats, and the Health Equity and Accountability Act have 59 co-sponsors, all Democrats. We're continuing to monitor these 3 diversity bills. We open feedback from anyone on this call. If you have any questions following this call, you can reach me at my email, p.rodriguez@everylifefoundation.org. Thank you.